Welcome to Inspired Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter Swoboda, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change. Yep, today is sort of a little bit of a special day, and therefore I'm going to do something a little bit different in terms of this podcast on inspiring change. I thought I'd share with you something that's particularly important to me, which is the upcoming release of my novel Mountains of the Sea. Now, some of you remember I've spoken about the importance of storytelling and narrative in our lives as human beings. I'm a great believer in the power of storytelling. The book Mountains of the Sea is a fish out of water story that's all about, a young man's personal growth and the importance of gathering some emotional intelligence as you get on with your life. And life's not necessarily always going to be a sort of a smooth process or smooth journey. In fact, life can, as you all know, and probably have experienced, life can throw some real curveballs at you, and sometimes you just don't really know what to do with them or how to cope with them. And part of the message that I want to convey is that if we are able to deal with both the ups and downs in a flexible and adaptable way, we're gonna not just survive but actually thrive, and that's what part of this story is about. So, I'm super stoked that the book is going to be on the shelves June 1, available globally. Initially, there's a pre-order through US retailers, Barnes & Noble, Amazon Books, Target. And in Australia, it's the pre-order's available through Dimmicks and Booktopia. And then, as I said, globally, everywhere in paperback and ebook on June 1. So you might be sort of going, okay, well, what's this book about? What does a psychologist write fiction on? Okay. And it just so happens that I wove into this story, this novel, the three areas that I'm absolutely passionate about, which is our journey as men and our capacity to overcome adversity. And it's, in that context, it's very much along the theme that I've been, using in the podcasts about turning points. All right. And finally, but not the least important one, is my absolute passion for the ocean and surfing. In of itself, the ocean and surfing is an absolute spectacular metaphor for our life journey. I can't think of a lesson that the ocean hasn't taught me that I can't apply, in real life. And no one else has put it as articulately as Sean Thompson in The Code. It's just one of those pursuits that, it gets you to the point where, you feel the fear, but you do it anyway, because as you're progressing in your skill set and your confidence, you're going to progressively get yourself out of your comfort zone. And that entails facing not just a bit of fear, but sometimes a lot of fear. Sometimes it means facing adversity like an injury. But the whole point, in many respects, is that, I see this as a particularly important story at this juncture in our history. My publisher, Winterwolf Press, in their press release, wrote something that I thought was particularly poignant and insightful, and that is that in the age of the Me Too and Time's Up movements, I weave a story about a young man, Walter Beaumont, who's raised in privilege but breaking out of the comfort zone and becoming something greater than himself. And that is essentially, at the heart of, my foundation of making good men great. I want people to get out of their comfort zone. We as men need to get out of our comfort zone to shed the traditional masculine chains, the patriarchal chains that bind us, and have us at times inflict pain and harm on those around us, but more importantly, often kills us, quite literally. And so, this is a story about really the coming of age of this young man, Walter Beaumont, who finds himself in a circumstance where he's forced to flee England and happens to end up on the HMS Resolution, Captain Cook's ship, which is about to go on an exploration to the South Seas. Now, that in of itself would be like a major turning point. It might, sailors might be used to it, but as a just average, or maybe perhaps not so average human being, because he is nobility, but just for a person who's used to comfort, this thing would take you right out of your comfort zone. I'm not sure if anyone has had ever the opportunity to go onto a tall ship, or say, for example, the HMS Resolution or the Endeavour, which is Cook's ship when he sailed to Australia. Those ships were not built for comfort. They were built for utility. That is, that they served a particular purpose, and the last thing that they were actually concerned with was people's comfort. The crew's comfort wasn't particularly on a high priority. So he's forced, in some respects, to deal with this, and the story is about how he deals with this, how he deals with the complete change of environment, none of the comforts that he's used to, but also none of his sins, in a sense, or hedonistic pleasures are available to him either. So whatever was familiar is left behind, and he's left, as I said, as a fish out of water. But he's not going to be defeated. Now, the story is about how all that unfolds. And as I said, part of it, in between the lines is this thing about, moving through, the hero's journey. His ordinary world is all about comfort and hedonistic pursuits, sex and drugs and alcohol and just being sort of, in a sense, a spoiled bad boy. And then suddenly, all of that has to change. And initially he's not exactly enamoured of the whole process. So if we look at it from the point of view of the hero's journey, can Walter refuse the call to adventure? And the answer is, well, fundamentally not. The repercussions of not answering the call in this instance would have been quite severe. Although probably maybe he could have bought his way out of it, but, who knows. And then it's not just the situations that he has to learn how to deal with, but also the variety of people. I mean, the character of James Cook, the officers. Walter is a man of privilege and rank, and he's thrown in essentially with the common folk. How are you going to deal with that? Can you maintain your high and mighty attitudes and personas? So part of that, I think, is particularly relevant to our times historically now. I think we do need to consider things like, do we persist with our notions of status, our notions of hierarchy, our beliefs about what each of us in our society actually means and what do we mean to each other. Can we come at this from not just a hierarchical perspective, and a perspective wherein our position in society is based on acquisitions? And these are the values, the characteristics that I talk about in patriarchy. Being territorial, being, hierarchical. As nobility, I have a particular level of influence and also impunity at times that probably is not necessarily deserved. What have I really done to earn this? And, if you're born into it, right, you haven't earned it. You're sort of given the pot of gold and go and play with it. And I see that in our culture often. We have an extraordinarily affluent, in general, culture wherein, despite the affluence, people are unhappy. And this was one of the things that was very, that when I was building the character and writing the character, and I must say the book almost wrote itself for lots of different reasons. There were times when I felt like I was channeling this thing. But, getting back to the point is that Walter's character is one that is not happy. He's a pained soul in many respects, and I see that often reflected in my work with teenage boys. They're not necessarily fundamentally happy. They're either, very nihilistic and wonder why they're here, and, is there a future for them? And if there is a future for them, what are they going to do with it? So they often resort to alcohol, drugs, sex, as a way of filling a void, a spiritual and emotional void that shouldn't, in essence, be there. And the message is that, as handy as it is at times to have affluence, the cost often is far greater than the benefit. So, do we perhaps entertain a much simpler life, one that is not necessarily fraught with, our ideas about social status and about what we own and what we earn and how we can accumulate more wealth? But the other aspect to it is this idea of competition between us as human beings. Is that really fundamentally, a drive, or is it something that it's imposed on us? And how do we deal with that? And so, Walter faces these challenges, all the tests, the allies that he meets, his, essentially his enemies, people who, for whatever reason, take a dislike to him. How does he deal with setbacks? So, I want to sort of, read a quote actually from the New York Times, which I'm absolutely stoked about. Not everybody sort of gets a quote or a review in the New York Times. And in this case, I've got one, and I'm very proud of that, and I sort of feel very chuffed, very grateful. And the New York Times calls the book visually exciting, with a very masculine but fractured lead character trying to find his way that many young men can/should relate to. The story's arcs, strong thematic and through line keeps you engaged all the way to the last page. That's really heartwarming, because that's what I wanted to write. I wanted to write something that would engage the reader on many different levels, not just one. This is on the surface. I wanted an adventure story, but I wanted a meaningful adventure story, a story that conveys messages at different levels, and something that in a lighter way can make us really think and reflect about our own journey, no matter what age. I'm hoping that young men are going to tune into this as much as mature men and men of in the third age, where we're facing, reflecting more on our own youth and